Even if you're sitting in front of your smart TV, you probably also have your laptop or your smartphone with you, right? So the idea of tying this together, really first and foremost, household targeting and measurement places consumer privacy at the forefront because we're moving away from one-to-one tracking and personalization really to more of a concept of one to a few, right? So from a privacy perspective, it's a better path forward.
Hi everyone, it's Wednesday, May 26th. Thanks for listening to the Behind the Numbers ad platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Viant. I'm your host, Principal Analyst Nicole Perrin, and this is my platform to talk about advertising with some of the smartest people I know. Today, joining me to do that is Jon Schulz, CMO at Viant Technology. Hi, Jon.
Hey, Nicole.
So excited to have you on today, Jon. We've known each other for a few years, but my audience might not be as familiar with you. So we're continuing our icebreaker questions to kind of set up the episode and introduce you and first introduce Viant a little bit. So Jon, can you tell us a little bit more about Viant? What kinds of companies are your clients and what's the main problem you're trying to help them solve?
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me, Nicole. Viant is a leading people-based advertising software company that enables both marketers and their agencies to centralize the planning, buying, and measurement of their advertising investments across channels. We work with marketers really across all advertising verticals to drive efficiency and effectiveness in their ad spend and ultimately drive a measurable return on that ad spend. I know you know this, Nicole, but since your listeners may be relatively new to Viant, I want to mention that this is our first year as a public company. Our IPO was back in February, and we're really excited about the trajectory of the company and our recent success.
Yeah, that's a very important point to mention. Now, a little question about you. So before the show, I shared with you eMarketer's estimates of media consumption among U.S. adults and the average amount of time that U.S. adults spend with various media channels. So can you tell listeners what's a media channel where you're a little bit of an outlier, whether that's because you're consuming more or less than the daily average?
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see those trends. And of course, they're averages and there's a lot of categories. And I definitely don't touch all of those categories. But I will say I used to do a little bit more terrestrial radio. I think I'm probably similar to a lot of people that since COVID came on the scene that I'm not in my car as much. So I'm not listening as much, but that used to be an area that I probably over-indexed a little bit from most people. But I'd say I'm pretty typical. TV consumption is mostly streaming, except for live sports. I'm currently in season 3 of Yellowstone, so that's where I'm at in my streaming life. And I spend a good portion of my day online, obviously, because of my job. So, index pretty high on digital as well. So that's kind of a little bit of a snapshot on me.
I love the terrestrial radio shout out. I definitely used to be a much higher than average terrestrial radio listener, but I haven't commuted by car for years and years. I haven't commuted by car for over a decade. So I would say I've probably under indexed on that for a while, even pre-pandemic and even pre-Spotify, pre-Pandora. So, but yep. I used to love it. I used to love listening to the radio. It's amazing how these things change. Like your whole lifestyle just looks unfamiliar when you think about it like that sometimes.
It sure does.
So Jon, moving on to our main discussion, which is about, some of the things that I've been talking about with people a lot lately, like identity, as well as, general issues around targeting. When I've been talking to people in the ad tech and agency space about identity recently, because of these regulatory and pseudo-regulatory changes that we're seeing with the rollout of iOS 14.5, as well as the impending deprecation of third-party cookies in Chrome, Viant has long been focused on a cookieless, people-based approach, right? So what can you tell us about householding and Viant's approach to people-based advertising?
Yeah, thank you for pointing out Viant has long had a different approach to identity and a lengthy track record of developing next generation ad tech solutions. We are early pioneers of people-based advertising, which is basically an approach of using real people rather than cookies to target and measure digital advertising. And as you can see, the recent moves in big tech are making our investments really come to the forefront now. I know it's easy to say, However, we filed a patent for our internet connected household identification a long time ago. So we've been working on this for a while. To frame it up for your audience, we filed that patent the same year Facebook had their IPO. So it's not just something that we're giving lip service to. It is something that we've worked on for a long time. Viant's household ID is patented. It's a layering approach that basically takes the 1.5 billion IP addresses in the US that flow through the bid stream to determine which are the roughly 115 million internet connected households. So that's effectively, in a nutshell, what the patent does. It's a proprietary approach. It's anchored on physical address with linkages to IP address and GPS coordinates for validation. And it's a future-looking solution that's scaled today and, importantly, is agnostic to browser cookies and device ID changes.
So, in other words, not affected by either of those two things that I mentioned, iOS 14.5 or the deprecation of third-party cookies in Chrome and other browsers.
Correct. I mean, the more identifiers, the more accurate you can be. But with those identifiers going away, it really doesn't affect our scale and ability to identify, target, and measure.
So household-based targeting, which is part of what you were just talking about, is, of course, the long-standing approach to TV advertising for a number of reasons, not least of which that you couldn't do anything else, right, with traditional TV advertising. But it has not been the norm with digital, partly because you could do something else. But does household-based targeting allow advertisers to do some things better than maybe individual level? Does it make it easier for them, for example, to execute and measure multi-channel campaigns that run across both traditional linear TV and CTV, or maybe even other types of digital display?
Yeah, I don't know if better is the word, because there's 80 plus identifiers out there and everybody can defend the merits of their different approaches. What I will say is it's scaled and more effective. Mm-hmm. I'd use the word effective. With the growth of devices and the connected home, the potential of the household is obviously emerging, right? When you're at home, if you think about yourself and your own behavior, you're not doing one thing, right? Even if you're sitting in front of your smart TV, you probably also have your laptop or your smartphone with you, right? So the idea of tying this together, really first and foremost, household targeting and measurement places consumer privacy at the forefront, because we're moving away from one-to-one tracking and personalization really to more of a concept of one to a few. Right. So from a privacy perspective, it's a better path forward. Secondly, it gives marketers control to activate smarter media strategies. It allows them to better manage reach and frequency and reduce waste while focusing their messages, on the products that ultimately build their businesses. Marketers can target multiple connected devices within the same home, as I talked about, right? It's not just, there's a lot of focus on CTV and smart TVs, but laptops, smartphones, tablets, it all ties together at the household IP.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm wondering, if there's particular types of advertisers that are maybe most interested in this, where household-based targeting works particularly well, or maybe it makes the most sense for the product that they're selling. Who does it work especially well for, and why?
I think it really works well across the board because, like I said, the biggest challenge with alternative ID solutions today is scale. And we have the scale. Our household ID is present over 80% of the time in the bid stream today. So we have the scale that we need. But if you think about significant purchases, when you tie things back to the household, vehicles, vacations, entertainment, those are all household decisions, right? So I think it works everywhere, but there are particular verticals that align very well with the household.
Yep. Yeah, that's, for sure. And I've looked at research on that for many, many years. Who in the household decides on vacations? Who in the household decides which fridge you're going to get next, or which car, like you just mentioned, but even other stuff too, like even groceries or any type of like a CPG product. The kids are watching TV and seeing some kind of ad and, influence the parents, like, I want X sugary cereal, right? That type of thing. So I'm sure that it does extend really across categories. The idea that it's a very reasonable decision to want to reach a household rather than just an individual.
Yep.
Cool. So I'm going to take a quick break for a message about our sponsor, and then I'll be back with Jon to talk more about identity, and targeting across advertising channels. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional e-commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to Vtex, that's VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. Cool. Back now with Jon, as I said, to talk more about targeting across ad channels. So we were talking earlier about Viant and what Viant does. And I think we didn't say explicitly that Viant has a DSP, a demand side platform, Adelphic. One of the things that I've been talking about a ton with colleagues internally is questions about using some on-platform self-serve buying method and, maybe engaging in like a walled garden style approach through that versus buying media through a DSP and what some of the differences and some of the benefits are there for advertisers. So I'm wondering, Jon, looking at CTV inventory, for example, and we know a lot of these streaming companies have recently developed their own buying platforms. Why does it make sense for advertisers and agencies to work with Viant's DSP, Adelphic, as opposed to just working directly with the streaming companies to buy CTV inventory?
Right. No, I think that's a great question, Nicole. And really, when you think about it, advertisers, especially big advertisers at the end of the day, are looking for audience segments, but they're looking for them at scale. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge that you really have is there are a number of high quality, premium streaming platforms out there, but none of them will encapsulate the entire target audience, right? So the audiences are inherently spread out. And because of all the changes happening by big tech and with identifiers in the digital ecosystem, I'm sure your listeners have experienced a connected TV streaming situation where they get the same ad over.
I was wondering if I was going to have to bring that up.
Yeah, no, it happens all the time. It's amazing, but the challenge is without proper tracking, like the Viant Household ID, every ad request looks like a new viewer.
Yep.
So even though you're having a continuous streaming experience, every time there's an ad pod or every time that there's an ad opportunity, there's no continuity there. So that viewer looks the same over and over. Of course, from the advertiser's perspective, that's not great, right? Because that's a lot of wasted impressions because you're overexposing that particular viewer at the expense of other viewers. So it's really important to have a global tracking, something like the Viant Household ID, where you can manage reach and frequency as well as measure across channels, because again, you may be consuming that content on a connected TV, but you're probably transacting on your laptop or probably on a mobile app where you're actually going in to execute a purchase. So you need to be able to create that attribution, right? The connected TV ad did have an impact on and drove the interest, but the actual transaction happened somewhere else, and you need to be able to link those together.
Yeah. Well, and presumably, also kind of reinforcing what you see on TV, connected TV with maybe, normal display ad, whether that's on a mobile device, on a desktop device. It's not just that you only want to see a message in one given channel. Advertisers know it often makes sense to show people messages across channels and drive them to action on one of them, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. And obviously, I know we were joking about it, but frequency capping has been, I feel like, I don't know, is it an exaggeration to say that it's been advertisers' biggest pain point with CTV? It's been such a complaint. It's been a huge pain point for consumers too. Unlike the measurement challenge, which doesn't annoy consumers, frequency capping is also really annoying to consumers.
Yeah, it doesn't benefit anyone, right? It doesn't benefit the marketer or the advertiser because of the over frequency. It doesn't benefit the publisher because of the inefficiency. They're not maximizing their CPMs. And certainly from a consumer perspective, it's very aggravating and annoying. So I don't really see anybody in the ecosystem or in the value chain that benefits from that.
Yeah. And, I know that you also mentioned the virtue of scale with an identifier, that's like a Delphix identifier. But, I think it also just bears repeating so many of the cookie alternatives that are being discussed these days, especially the ones that are some type of authenticated solution. They are very small scale still at this point. And scale has been a complaint that I've seen more and more as the advertisers are wanting to test some of these solutions more, that the scale just isn't there. And when you look, you only see some low single digit percentage of bid requests coming through in the bid stream with an authenticated identifier attached.
Yeah, that's consistent with what we see. We actually have a dashboard where we track that. And, cookies are still are still in the bid stream at 55%, but that's basically, Chrome's market share at this point. So, but you start to go down the longer tail, whether it's publisher IDs or, alternative cookie IDs, email-based IDs. And you're right. What we've seen is a lot of low single digits. And that obviously is not going to get it done for a big advertiser.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that Viant had applied for this patent way back in the same year that Facebook IPO'd. Another blast from the past, I guess, about over 10 years ago, Viant founded Zumo, which is an ad-supported streaming service, right? And you sold it last year to Comcast. So you've been involved in programmatic CTV and also programmatic linear TV for, a long time, right? So what are your thoughts on the continued shift of more advertiser spend into both of those channels, programmatic CTV and programmatic linear TV? What are you kind of expecting over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, the TV industry is undergoing significant disruption. Internet-enabled CTV has become the preferred vehicle for streaming video content. Your own eMarketer research shows by 2024, 66% of the population is expected to be using CTV, which will result in a CTV ad spend to grow at a 25% compounded annual growth rate, and it's forecasted to be $27 billion by 2025. So there's, did COVID drive acceleration in growth? Absolutely. But the growth was already happening, and it's going to continue to happen in the CTV space. And we really believe that this represents a tailwind for Viant. As you mentioned, we founded Zumo over 10 years ago. And unlike most companies that are benefiting from the near-term CTV growth, we have streaming and CTV experience and technology that scales. And this has been proven for us for more than a decade. And this is really positioning us as a leader in the CTV space. Right now, CTV is Viant's fastest growing channel. It represents 45% of total platform spend on Adelphic as of the first quarter of this year. And we're people-based. So we're people-based. We have a patented household ID, and we have the approach and expertise and scale in CTV. And we really think that trifecta is going to propel us in the cookieless ad tech space.
And what about programmatic linear? What's your kind of outlook there?
Yeah, we see that as a very effective alternative, especially for regional advertisers. We've had a lot of success with programmatic linear, for example, travel and tourism bureaus. So, if you're a state and you're looking to attract travelers from neighboring states or neighboring markets, programmatic linear can and has been a very effective vehicle. And it's a good complement. Like you said earlier, Nicole, nobody does a single channel media plan anymore. And so what we see is programmatic linear having a role in a multifaceted advertising approach.
And can you just talk a little bit about kind of what programmatic linear means? It's not the same as the typical digital programmatic, right?
Yeah, no, it is still fairly manual. It's a little bit more of a still checking avails and understanding what is available on a market by market, on a network by network basis. We can turn those around a lot faster than the historical methods, but there's still a little bit, it's not as real time, right, as the bid stream and as connected TV or the other, pure digital channels, but it is a step forward for linear TV. And listen, linear TV is still a big segment of the market.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think looking past that is a little bit short-sighted. And so in our minds, we're not picking the winners. We're supporting all channels to be where the advertisers want to be.
Yeah, I was actually having a conversation about exactly what you just said earlier today, this idea that, don't kind of count out TV, linear TV spending is still tens of billions of dollars a year. Even if it is going down, it's going down slowly. More inventory is becoming programmatically available all the time, and it is growing. So we at eMarketer, our most recent estimates for programmatic TV came out just this past April. We estimate that spending on programmatic linear TV will go up by more than 35% this year to $5.44 billion. Now, that is smaller than our estimate for programmatic CTV ad spending, which we estimate reaching over $9 billion this year. But again, we expect programmatic linear TV to continue growing at pretty robust double-digit rates for the rest of our forecast period. So yeah, smaller than programmatic CTV still at this point, but definitely a substantial channel and growing as a share of total linear TV.
Yeah, and when you think about it from a content perspective, right, that's still where consumers are getting their local news. That's still where a lot of sports and other big platforms, Super Bowl, Grammys, a lot of that is still on broadcast, right? So there is a role for all of it, for sure.
For sure. Well, unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today. But thank you so much, Jon, for talking to me on the Behind the Numbers ad platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure to be on.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you for listening. I'll be back in a couple weeks with the next episode of the ad platform. And in the meantime, please continue to let us know what you think at podcast@emarketer.com. Thanks.